Now, one thing I want to say, just interesting, because like I said, we're looking at all four Gospels, and whenever you do that, there's all sorts of neat things that come to light. And so one thing I want to mention that we need to consider as we look at the Bible, as we study the Gospels, as we look at God's Word, one of the things, and we'll look at a few here in a minute, that critics like to point out are differences or discrepancies, variations in the stories, and they'll go, aha, looky there, isn't that just such a problem? Well, whenever you take this portion in all four Gospels and you put it up side by side, like you see on the screen there, you actually see where there actually are some differences. And one of the big differences, the differences in order. What you see highlighted there are different sections that are telling the same things, but you notice they're not in the same places. Right, so at one point, we saw they give him sour wine to drink. That's what's highlighted in gray. Matthew and Mark have that before they crucify him. Luke has that after they're crucifying him and while they're mocking him. And John puts that right before he dies. It's not even in the portion that we looked at. You see the other criminals being crucified. That's what's highlighted in blue. Luke and John, right, have them crucified at the same time as Jesus. Matthew and Mark, they're crucified later on. You have them dividing Jesus' garments. That's highlighted there in yellow. Matthew, Mark, and Luke have it at the beginning. John puts it later. You have the people mocking Jesus, saying, he saved others, let him save himself. That's what's highlighted in green. As you can see, Luke has it near the beginning, Matthew and Mark near the end. John doesn't mention it at all. So what are we to make of this? Critics would want to say, look at all of this. They can't even agree on what's happening and when. One thing you have to remember is this is not some, Google researched precision biography in the 21st century, right? That this isn't the way we write, is not the way they write. And so what we are seeing here in the four Gospels are eyewitness accounts of these events. And one thing that you can be sure of is that eyewitnesses are going to disagree on some details. They're going to focus on certain things and not on others. It's actually the case that detectives, attorneys, if you got a crime involved, right? Whether it's the crime scene, the detective trying to figure out, or you're talking about the courtroom and what's going on, these little variations, these little kind of slight differences in testimony are actually something that stands out to show people that testimony is reliable. So whereas critics want to point and go, oh, look, so when did this happen? Did they mock him here? Did they mock him there? Well, the fact that different eyewitness accounts are remembering things slightly a little bit different, not contradicting, but just a little bit different, actually speaks to the reliability of the Gospels as eyewitness accounts, eyewitness testimony. Let me read you a quote by J. Warner Wallace, cold case homicide detective. He's well-known. We've done some studies from him. He's written some good books. He was an atheist for many years, homicide detective. He's been on Dateline several times. He solved some very high-profile cold case homicides there where he is in California. And he took his set of tools as a cold case detective and investigated the Gospels as a 2,000-year-old cold case, and he came out discovering they're true. Jesus rose from the dead. And this is what he says about testimony. He says, the gospel authors and the early church certainly had the opportunity to change the descriptions to make sure that they matched, but they refused to do so. As a result, we can have even more confidence in the reliability of these accounts. They display the level of variation I would expect to see if they were true, reliable eyewitness descriptions. So these kind of little things that we see, they don't actually contradict one another. As we're about to look at a few of them, they don't contradict one another. They're just a little bit slightly different in the telling of the story. And that shows the reliability of the gospel accounts as historical documents, as eyewitness accounts.